Proceed to number 10 on our agenda, the approval of the minutes of the November 13th, 2023 board meeting. Do I have a motion? Mr. Hogan.
I'd like to make the motion that we approve the minutes of the November 13th, 2023 board meeting.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Ms. Snipes. Any discussion? Seeing none, I will call for the vote. All in favor? That motion carries 7-0, and that moves us to number 11, public participation. Before we get started, the board welcomes and encourages public participation. We respectfully ask that you adhere to the procedures provided in Board Policy BE-DH, public participation at meetings. Your comments should be limited to 3 minutes and must remain on either the topic noted on your sign-in form or a listed agenda item. Questions asked during public participation will be handled in accordance with Board Policy BE-DH. Ms. Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Logan Ray is here to speak about policy on trans student names.
Good afternoon. Afternoon, members of the board. My name is Logan Ray. I'm a student of Spring Hill High School, and I've come to speak on the recent policies requiring schools to notify parents if any student chooses to go by any name other than what is on legal documentation. The recent policy has required each student who wishes to use any name or pronouns other than what is on legal documentation to be approved by the school's counseling office, which requires parental consent. Though this may seem reasonable, it is in reality discriminatory in nature. In practice, this does not apply to cisgender and/or heterosexual students wishing to use nicknames or middle names. Only gender-diverse students or those who do not appear to be heteronormative face discrimination as a result of this policy, a clear violation of the discrimination section of Title IX, of the Equal Protection Clause under the 14th Amendment, and of the board's own policies on discrimination. Gender-diverse students have always faced discrimination, especially in schooling, from peers to faculty to even friends. However, this new implementation of systematic discrimination creates an even more hostile environment for gender-diverse and other LGBTQ students, removing autonomy and feeding transphobia and homophobia within schools, creating an air of hopelessness and oppression for these individuals. This is a great contributor to one of the biggest problems that public schools face, teen suicide and mental health. Nearly 14% of adolescents who have attempted suicide report to be gender diverse in some way. An unfathomably high 50.8% of transgender male students have attempted suicide in the past. These figures reflect actual attempts rather than suicidal ideation or diagnosis. This furthermore also applies to 29% of trans female, 41.8% of non-binary gender non-conforming, and 27.9% of adolescents questioning. This policy effectively requires the school to out these children to their parents, potentially putting them into dangerous situations and creating home conflict, which can only worsen these statistics. Although it can be argued that it is the parent's right to know their child's choice of name and pronouns within schools, that is a matter between child and parent. It should not be the duty of the school to inform a parent on home matters such as that. We should respect the autonomy and rights of individual children to make their own decisions and for teachers to respect them on an individual level. It is the duty of school faculty, as stated in policy JICFFA, JLBDD, and Title IX, to nurture and protect students in a positive environment free of discrimination. So I ask the board to remove this discriminatory policy and prevent future discrimination in our schools. Keep these students safe. The school should stand for what is right and just, should foster respect and love for all, regardless of race, sex, gender, LGBTQ status, or otherwise. I thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Janet Howell is here to speak about book topics.
Good evening. I'm Janet Howell. I live in Chapin. I'm a parent of 2 adult children and 3 grandchildren, and our granddaughter will be attending the schools in Lexington 5 District. It has been brought to my attention that the series of books, including Mist and Fury, is up for discussion regarding placing in our school libraries. After reading the reviews on this book, because frankly I could not stomach reading the book, It has come to my attention that this book has sexually explicit information that is inappropriate for school-age children to read. Excuse me. These conversations about sex are crude, and there are abusive sexual relationships in this book. Ask yourself, what good comes from reading material like this book? If you have to question whether a book is appropriate for a certain age level, then it is not appropriate. Books in school libraries should be for educational purposes. This book does not teach our students anything worth learning. This is not about the freedom to read, as the ACLU is claiming. A person has the right to go to a public library or a bookstore if they want to read these books. I believe parents have the right to determine what is acceptable for their children to read. Sex, porn, and violence should not be acceptable reading materials for any grade level in our school libraries. As you are aware, this book has already been removed from several school libraries across the United States. Let our school system have the courage to say no, just like we teach our children to say no to drugs, alcohol, and violence. These things can harm all of our children as well as reading materials like this book. It is our duty as parents and educators to protect our children from harm. Please, I ask that you just say no to allowing this book in our school libraries. Thank you.
Lisa Kerr is here to speak about appropriate school materials.
Good evening. My name is Lisa Kerr. I am the executive director of Lighthouse for Life, where we are a local nonprofit that has been fighting sex trafficking. I thank you for your time and your consideration this evening into what books our kids are reading and have access to. Last year's SLED identified over 420 cases of sex trafficking in our state, with 399 of those involving minors. But that's really just a drop in the bucket, as a lot of people believe that this is overtaking the drug market in prevalence. And that's because it preys on something that is a natural vulnerability to all of us, and that is sex. Sex is not something to be ashamed of, but it is a very powerful tool because it impacts us physically, emotionally, and socially. And if it is not taken care of and presented in a way that can be fostered safely, then it can end up being a weapon that, or a tool that fuels the sex trafficking industry. That typically happens in one of three ways. We have our youth that are getting access to content at a much younger age and are learning about sex in a way that is fueling curiosities that then can be preyed upon by perpetrators. It also breaks down resistance for them to say no if somebody comes and asks something of them, that they may not see this as a bad person who then can turn around and exploit them. Another way that it impacts sex trafficking is it can fuel the demand. There is a possible addictive quality to sex that then, as our kids are getting exposed to it, they end up wanting to fulfill that desire more and more, which then leads to the purchase of sex down the roads and fuels the industry. And lastly, it also plays upon the perpetrators, who then can take that and use it as a weapon to turn around and exploit somebody for that vulnerability, which, as we have seen then, leads to a second grader teaching another second grader how to bypass the default settings and look up sex videos online. It leads to girls being called out of class and asking to take pictures of themselves that then they're sending to somebody that is selling them for profit. And it leads to multiple cases of our boys being susceptible to sextortion, all because of a topic, sex, that is being abused because it is not protected in a healthy atmosphere. Once a victim of sex trafficking, the average victim experiences rape over 1,800 times a year. That is something that totally changes somebody's lifestyle and is a tragedy that then at Lighthouse for Life we're trying to come alongside and clean up. And it often begins with exposure within our schools. So all I'm asking you to do is to help us join the fight against sex trafficking by being careful about the books that we are putting in a context that is not supported and that anybody has access to, that then can be used as a weapon to fuel the sex trafficking industry. Thank you.
Tricia Kling is here to speak about appropriate school materials.
Good evening. I'm here tonight as an advocate for students' mental health and their tax-paying parents' rights to decide appropriate reading materials for their own children. Speaking as a professional with my doctorate in education with 30 years of experience as a teacher, school psychologist, and district-level leadership, I'd like to start with two questions. One, is it permissible to show R-rated movies in the high school classroom to students under 17 without their parents' permission or knowledge? Two, is it permissible to have vending machines that sell alcohol on our high school campuses? As ludicrous as either of these sound is having books like A Court of Mist and Fury readily available in our high school libraries. This book is clearly geared toward mature readers, falling under the category of new adult, targeting 18 to 25 years of age, clearly beyond high school limits, where content can focus explicitly on sexual topics. Throughout this latest book in the series, there are portions too explicit to read aloud to an adult population, yet we're considering having it accessible to our minors. A Court of Mist and Fury is littered with sexually graphic passages so explicit that it could be considered pornographic or erotica. All one has to do is peruse chapters 2, 14, 26, 29, I go on, and several others, just to name a few examples. Pornographic is defined as anything containing detailed descriptions of sexual organs or the emotions, feelings, or behaviors associated with sex. I ask you to do your own research and ask yourselves, does this material fit the definition, and if so, is it appropriate for minors? Legally, it explicitly counters South Carolina Code of Laws 16-15-305, which expressly forbids the dissemination of obscene materials to minors. There are reasons for these precautions. Research shows that premature exposure to sexual graphic material may shape negative or unrealistic attitudes, behavior, expectations regarding intimacy, lower emotional security, negatively affect healthy intimate relationships, trigger post-trauma, exacerbate ongoing trauma, cause poor mental health issues, perpetuate sexism, objectification, and distorted views of sex, and can lead to deviant or reckless behavior resulting in unintended consequences. In closing, I support State Superintendent of Education Ellen Weaver's comments. South Carolina must establish a clear, transparent, uniform process that respects the legitimate prerogative of parents and protects students from materials that are not age or developmentally appropriate. No one is saying that the state should ban books. Buy whatever books you want. Share whatever you feel is appropriate with your kids in your own house. All we're saying is don't make other people pay for your kids to read porn, and don't expose it to other kids without their consent. I strongly encourage you to follow her lead and ask, where are the boundaries that protect our students? Let's start with our own schools and ascertain that FAPE ensures safe reading materials. Thank you.
All right, that concludes public participation.